say to people who say Putin is being manipulated and managed? And by the way, I'm one of those people. I'm not going to take this. Sometimes the media say, what do you say about people? I'm one of those people. I know that the belief is that, well, if we pretend that we go through this pantomime of negotiations, that we may be able to get something out of it. And look, I agree, right? So I'm not against them going through the motions of negotiations. By the same token, though, those people who are screaming, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, part of my issue and my anger with that is, dude, Trump is a belligerent in this conflict. And for all of this pretending that they're in talks, Putin is moderating what is taking place on the battlefield to try to get better headlines, or at the very least to try to manipulate Trump. And by definition, on some level, that's a manipulation of Putin himself. Donald Trump is a belligerent. So trying to get him on your side seems like a fool's errand when he is a belligerent and party to the conflict. I like, what do you say to people who say, well, Putin is not manipulating Trump, it's the other way around. Putin is limiting and restraining himself under this model of trying to get, I don't know, Trump on this side. And by the way, you can see it for RT. Like just the language that they use, the acting as if Trump is being managed, or Trump is not being given the information, Trump is not being given the data. Even Russian officials have said this nonsense, as if there's some daylight, there's some separation between what is happening on the battlefield in regards to what Ukraine is doing versus Trump's knowledge of those events. Give me a take on that.
Yeah, so first of all, RT is not like some Chinese English language newspapers, right? What comes out of RT, it would shock people to discover how little it is from the Russian government. Right?
Fair enough.
I mean, obviously there are links, there are interests, but having been, while not an RT employee, about as close as it's possible to be for many years without, I mean, there's
separation. And I know
very little to none.
Yeah.
Often it would be like, well, how do we run this story? If only we had some word from on high about how we should, but there isn't, right?
Fair enough.
Really a problem. So there obviously is a commonality of interest, but there's remarkably little to none direct messaging from the Russian government in that regard. So when you say some people are manipulating, some people believe some people are manipulating Putin, who are those people that are manipulating Putin?
What I mean by that is the very act of trying to negotiate with Donald Trump and trying to seem amenable and reasonable and trying to say, okay, we'll have this 30-day or this ceasefire against energy grids. Okay, well, basically he is limiting, or it comes across as if he's limiting the activity and restraining, let's say, the Russian military and himself and their objectives under this model of trying to get Donald Trump to believe that he is more amenable as opposed to Zelensky. I mean, you've made this argument that part of the reason that he's doing that and they're going through this pantomime of peace negotiations because all things being equal, they want Trump to believe that Ukraine is the one that is not interested in negotiations. I guess I'm saying, isn't that a fool's errand? Donald Trump is A, the main actor that is keeping this conflict going, and B, is part of the country that was the instigator to the conflict in the first place.
So all sides of it, I mean, whether we're talking the Kremlin, Putin, and other Russian officials, whether we're talking the White House, whether we're talking the European political elites, the EU technocracy, the individual state leaders, whether we're talking Zelensky and the Kiev regime, everyone is trying to manipulate each other. I mean, there's no question about that. That's the constant game. I would venture to say that if Trump is trying to manipulate, and people in the U.S. are trying to manipulate Putin in the Kremlin, and Putin and the Kremlin are trying to manipulate Trump and his people around him, I would venture to say that I'm a lot more confident in Putin's ability to manipulate Trump than the other way around, without saying that it's not a part of the game, right? Both sides trying to manipulate each other. But I would venture to think that Putin is pretty intelligent, extremely to the point of insanity, well informed, and very capable and strong-willed in his motivations and intentions.
Let me ask you this way, then. Let me ask you this way: is Putin
I
limiting?
don't think Trump is any of those things, by the way.
No, he's not. He's incompetent. He's deeply incompetent. But is Putin limiting his activities with the idea of to give this idea that he is trying to negotiate?
So what do you think Russia would do that they're not doing now because they are simultaneously involved in this dance? Is there something that Russia would be doing? Is there some connection? Because I'm not so sure that there's something that Russia would be doing on the battlefield, separate, that they would not be doing, or that they should be doing if they weren't involved in these negotiations. I'm not so sure that's necessarily true. You could argue that the Russian government should be pounding all of Ukraine with Oreshniks and killing the Ukrainian leadership, but I think they have a pretty strong battle plan, and I don't necessarily think that is the reason why Russia limits itself. I think there are limits of a calculated game, either correctly or incorrectly, on deterring NATO from intervening directly in the conflict openly, right? Becoming an open NATO-Russia war, which I think the Kremlin does seek to avoid. And as always, the Russian government is despite all the propaganda in the Western mainstream media to the contrary, far more concerned about limiting Russian military casualties than the Kiev regime or the West is interested in limiting casualties among the Kiev regime's forces and forced conscripts and the like. I mean, what was that phrase that was it Mark Milley? It was the Pentagon used to criticize the Kiev regime during the NATO planned and failed summer 2023 offensive in the South, too casualty averse. I mean, that was the word out of the U.S. military, right? You're not too willing to get enough of your people killed to achieve the objectives we think you should be able to achieve, right? So I think the exact opposite is true, right? I mean, Russia wants to win this, and they are willing to put their people at risk, but not unnecessary risk, not when things might be done a little bit slower, but with much greater loss of life and much, at least the calculation, less risk of overt escalation to World War III. At the same time, part of this diplomatic dance is not directed against Trump or the West at all. Some of it is directed against Russian allies in BRICS, and in the global China. South, if you will, to show that yes, we are and always have been the reasonable people, and we are willing to pursue, at least the option of achieving our goals diplomatically, even if the chances of it are not very high. They're maintaining, shall we say, the diplomatic high ground. But I'm not so sure that necessarily means they're sacrificing things on the battlefield because of some type of restraint because of that. I'm not so, maybe, right? But I haven't seen any direct evidence of that, right? That
Will there be retaliation?
Would be doing something else. Will there be retaliation? Sure. It will be calculated. Will it be retaliation that Russia wouldn't have necessarily made anyway and will simply be called retaliation? I don't know. We'll have to see what the extent of that is. Obviously, the number one target to me should be the Kiev regime's intelligence, because they at least carried it out. I would also hope that in the scope of going after the Kiev regime's intelligence, they try to go after all of the Western intelligence that are actually on the ground, at least, helping them out, or green lighting at the very least.
See, that's right there, Mark. That's my point. If they got the ability to do that, and they had the ability to do that, why weren't they doing it already? That's what I mean by restraint.
Okay. So Russia has gone after the Kiev regime's intelligence, particularly their military intelligence, but also SBU installations multiple times before, right? Russia has not gone after political, right? They have not tried to assassinate, no matter the propaganda claims to the contrary, right? There haven't been any assassination attempts from the Russian government on Zelensky or others, where they, routinely go after political assassination of political leaders, military leaders, thousands of political leaders, activists, everyone across the former Ukrainian states, right? Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Crimea. That's a regular feature. Russia doesn't go after the political leaders because it doesn't believe that achieves anything. In fact, they believe that most of the Kiev regime's officials and leaders, like Zelensky, that they're so bad at what so incompetent, so bad at what they do, that replacing them would only increase the chance that someone more competent would have the position, right? But the competent people planning this out, such as they are competent, and there's question, right? The whole British planned cross the Dnieper Krinky crusade to take Crimea, that was not competence, right? That was just complete, utter military fantasy and failure. Likewise, the Mark Milley planned southern offensive, right, into Zaporozhye. That was not competence. But, occasionally they get off successes. And I certainly believe they had their finger in this thing. But again, this is not something that's going to change any type of strategic realities or realities on the course of the battlefield. It hurts. It's a black eye, if you want, or something, but ultimately it's more about narrative than it is about military success.
Let me ask you something. So, from my point of view, you're far too rational, right? Like the way that I feel about it.
I flip. Some days I get emotional, right? Sometimes I don't. Today might be one of my I'm bipolar, right? Today is more my rational.
I feel far more brutal about this. Yeah. And I guess my thing is, if Russia actually wants negotiations and they actually want a deal, then savage prosecution of the war seems to be the better way to get it. Donald Trump has been.
I think they are doing. I mean, you could argue that it should be more savage, but I think they are going about that. Again, I don't necessarily believe that having Medinsky sit in Istanbul is necessarily a restraint or limitation on what the Russian military is doing on the battlefield. And just blowing stuff up with Oreshniks in Ukraine may not necessarily be the best response or general strategy going before. Yeah, the Kremlin and the Stavka, the Russian military leaders, they're pretty cold-blooded. They're pretty rational, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, they're probably more cold-blooded and rational than I am. And in general, that's a good thing. Even if a gut emotional response at any given moment, makes me, curse things like this that happened, right? I do believe that, generally speaking, they know better. They've certainly made some mistakes, right? And again, there was a mistake. There was an intelligence failure, right? I will not contest that, in the slightest. But that doesn't mean that the correct response is to go all half-cocked and to blow stuff up with Oreshniks to satisfy, some type of emotional a demand for revenge, for retribution. I think the retribution should be cold-blooded and calculated.
No, I understand. In fact, I told the audience that's what you were going to say. Before you got
I'm sorry. Again, like this is a rational day for me.
And that's a negative. They have a strategy, and they're enacting their strategy. I do get it, and it's like this doesn't change anything. Yeah,
Russia is beating all of NATO on the battlefield, and all the attempts to obfuscate that and claim otherwise. They've survived an existential economic war that would crush all but probably one other country in the world, right? If it was leveled at them, maybe one or two, right? They have endured the entire military might that could be employed by not just NATO, not just the collective West, but anyone else they could rope into sending resources.
Serbia,
Pakistan, Israel, Serbia, sending last. They've done all of that, and Russia is still. The comparison that came out of the Pentagon about a month ago, someone compared to the Russian advances as like a slow-moving lava flow, right? That you can move back out of the way, but the advance of that lava flow is inexorable, right? There's nothing you're going to do to stop it, and that's like the Russian advances here. Could be faster, right? There would be a cost for that, a cost diplomatically, a cost militarily, a cost potentially to political stability within Russia, and they have all these things calculated. And without saying that they can't make mistakes, they have made mistakes. I'll be willing to give them a fair shake here and see what they do in response and see. Again, we can talk intelligence failure. We can talk about that every airbase should have hardened facilities for all of their aircraft wherever they are in Russia. Those are two things that I wouldn't argue with at all. And those are legitimate criticisms. But just don't fall victim to that emotional need for some type of big bang. That's such such a male thing. Admittedly, I am part of that gender, that sex, I should say myself, right? And so I certainly understand the impulse, right? Someone strikes me, I want to strike them back. And I don't want to take an eye for an eye. I want to take two eyes for one.
Right.
Eye,
right.
But the Kremlin is remarkably cold-blooded and calculated, and they are restrained, I believe, primarily in the interest of long-range strategic calculations and avoiding World War III more than anything else. Again, it's not a guarantee that they get things right, but I trust them more than I trust my gut response.
What do you say about this notion that the longer the war goes, the more attempts that NATO has to attack Russia? Because
it's undoubtedly
absolutely true. Is it absolutely true?
Absolutely true. Yeah. Of course, they will read anything as Russia's weakness, right? Anytime Russia shows restraint or waits and does something, the West only understands strength, and what's more, they only understand obvious and crude demonstrations of strength, right? And doubtless this will encourage them to do more such dirty tricks. The only thing I can say is it took them a year and a half to plan and execute this, right? They can plan a few more of these things and give Russia a few more pokes and stings along the way. And at the end of the day, Russia is still going to remove that regime in Kiev at the end.
One last thing before I let you go. So there are reports that Russia is preparing for an overwhelming offensive. And apparently there's a massive military buildup at certain locations. Where's the airbase? One airbase in particular, I had this thing right here. So it says, I think it's called LL-76 transport plane has arrived at the Russian Ingles 2 airbase. It's already the 8th flight in 4 days. Such activity was recorded for the first time in the last 3 years. So Ukraine is basically reporting that Russia is in a build-up phase, especially from the standpoint of their armaments at some of these air bases. Do you think that is part to why the attack took place on the air bases in this way? I mean, obviously, if they took this along the planet, they were already going after it. And
Sure.
the thing that I was getting at with the NATO part was because going after Russia's strategic planes like that was a specific NATO target. Even
Sure.
bombing the railroads was, again, that was something that NATO talked about, saying, hey, we can blow up the Russian railways, and this would slow down their ability, and we can use IEDs to do it. That's exactly what they did. They were going after Russia's ability to strike back in regards to some kind of nuclear assault, meaning if the U.S., well, let's say NATO versus Russia, and it ends up being a nuclear conflict, they wanted to damage Russia's ability to respond in kind. I mean, these were NATO attacks. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, the longer the war goes on, the more they get the opportunity to strike from the shadows where Russia can't create a justification to actually go after them. But I'm sorry.
No. I agree with that, right? I believe there are both, there are, rationales, that were probably both considered. Yes, this is deteriorating Russia's nuclear strategic assets. It's also deteriorating their strategic conventional assets, right? Carriers to launch cruise missiles, for the conflict in Ukraine. And I very much believe that movement into angles is about, Russia almost preparing for more and larger missile strikes, right? That's almost, so yes. But that almost certainly factors into the Kiev regime's, desire to limit this. But again, at the end of the day, despite events like this, right, that NATO undoubtedly had their hands in, the U.S. Supreme Commander Cavaioli, General Cavaioli of NATO armed forces in Europe, has himself testified multiple times that at the end of the day, the Russian military is far larger, more capable, more experienced, more skilled, more evolved equipment, more just absolutely pumping military industrial complex. Mm-hmm. If the goal of this is to weaken Russia, it's not working. You're only making the bear stronger and angrier. At the end of the day, we can endure these stings. We can even endure a few black eyes and bloody pointed stick wounds, right? But at the end of the day,
it doesn't change anything on the ground.
I don't think, again, that word inexorable again and again and again. And it's not absolutely inexorable. The Kremlin is balancing a lot of things. They're balancing domestic political support that is essential. It's essential for 40 to 50 or 60,000 guys signing up, volunteer, motivated soldiers to participate in this. It's essential for the domestic political support that across society for the SMO that drives this. They're balancing the economy, right, to make sure, once again, that the political side inside Russia, the domestic, doesn't become disenchanted because of domestic political things. They also want to maintain a strong domestic economy and ramp up the military industrial. They're balancing so many different things in this, and to try for us to armchair focus on any particular one at any particular time. I mean, I guess you could argue that as media figures and analysts, that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I am perfectly willing, when I believe it is necessary, to criticize the Russian government. And I've done so on many, many, many occasions. But I also believe in being cool-headed and restrained in that criticism till I get enough of the facts that I believe are warranted. And I said there are certain things we can consider here.
Yeah, that's fair.
But ultimately, I think there is a reason why the Russian government is going through this diplomatic pantomime, and I find it annoying. At some level, like, oh my God, is this nonsense still going on? Okay, let's check and see what happened on the battlefield, right? That's where I am. But
Speaking of that,
I don't
the
think
memorandum.
it is necessarily bad. Yes.
No, no, I agree with you. I don't think going through they should go through the diplomacy. I'm not against it at all. I guess my thing was brutality more so. But the memorandum, I don't know another way to say it, right? The memorandum itself.
More bombs, bigger bombs.
Right. So Ukraine brings their dead letter path to peace, which is complete nonsense.
Yeah. Their demands for an unconditional ceasefire, right?
Yeah, which again is complete nonsense. Did Russia ever out theirs?
I'm sorry?
Did Russia ever out theirs? I don't remember Russia ever.
No, not yet. No, they haven't yet, and they refused to. They said we're not going to release it beforehand. We're not going to allow the West time to prepare a response for the Kiev regime for this. We're not going to allow media to manipulate it beforehand. We'll present it at the actual meeting with the Ukrainians on the other side of the table, and that is a diplomatic maneuver itself. Yeah. Right, they're all extremely angry and frustrated and everything, and that's part of Russia's diplomatic game that is going on. No, we're not going to tell you what's in it beforehand. This is a high stakes, serious diplomatic negotiation involving a conflict. Right, we'll do it the proper way. We're not going to leak it to the media beforehand. There's something to say about this. And ultimately, what the Kiev regime and its Western backers are doing now with regards to their demands for a ceasefire. I saw a meme posted by the Irish journalist Che Boys.
Yes.
That summarized it completely for me. It was the picture, like a pen and ink drawing of two Roman gladiators, one defeated and one standing above him with the sword and looking to the crowd for the thumbs up, thumbs down signal. And the one on the ground, of course, is the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And they're turning to the crowd and saying, I demand a 30-day ceasefire. Unconditionally, right? I mean, that's where it is.
I mean, these plans are going to be irreconcilable. Russia's already, for the most part, given their plan. They haven't deviated from it for the past several years.
No, they have not. They haven't moved an inch. Not one concession. Not anything. They don't feel they need to. Again, we'll go through. The pantomime. We'll go through the pretense. But ultimately, you don't agree to our terms, then we'll achieve the terms on the battlefield. If you agree to our terms, then this can all end now.
Do you think Trump walks?
No, I don't believe he can. I think there's just too much institutional pressure, too much U.S. national interests. Even considering that on a personal level, I believe that Trump has nothing but contempt for Zelensky. He hates the European political elite. He doesn't personally care that much about Ukraine, but still, he is now the U.S. president. He owns this war. The U.S. interest that he can't separate himself from is the U.S. interest is preserving a U.S. proxy regime in Ukraine as best he can. And I don't believe that he can walk away from it. I mean, I certainly, if I was a hoping man, which I don't do hope, I would say that I hope that he can shrug that off and walk away, but I don't believe it. I any more than I believe that he was going to have an administration not full of neocons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean,
I think he will gripe and he will scream, and it's not my war, it's Biden, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, he will find himself dragged more and more back into doing what the Biden administration was doing, which is more ineffectual sanctions and scraping the barrel of whatever military supplies they can provide to the Kiev regime to keep it fighting as long as possible, and probably a little time after that. right? And it will drag this out, and it will raise the costs to Russia. But I do believe that he probably won't ever be as full-throated in that support as the Biden administration was, right? At least for the moment, the U.S. is not literally firing ballistic missiles into mainland Russia, right? I mean, we were there. We were at a Cuban Missile Crisis, perhaps greater moment. And the only thing that prevented that was the Kremlin's belief that whatever else the Trump administration was going to do, it was going to back off that degree of provocation. And to be fair, up to this point, they have, right? So, I mean, I don't expect or hope or give the Trump administration much credit for anything else. But I will give them credit for we're not literally at World War III right now. The Russian side already showed restraint. The Trump side backed off of what Biden was doing, at least in that regard, up until this moment as well.
I guess the question is, and this could be the last one, at some point, Zelensky is going to run out of money. And they've already started begging people for what, $44 billion for 2026, something like that, some insane amount of money.
The Kiev regime requires somewhere between $40 and $60 billion just of economic support to pay the bills, right? To pay the soldiers, to pay the bureaucrats, to keep what lights it has on. That's not even talking military aid. That's because the Kiev regime really has no effective economy at this point, right? They require somewhere between 40 and 60 billion just to keep them going. The thing is that, the U.S. can just print money on demand, right?
Well, that's the question. Do you think Trump's going to do that? That's exactly what I was going to ask you. And this could be the last question. Do you think he's going to, because at some point the question is going to come up. Is Congress going to pass an appropriations bill to give Zelensky money? And can he even politically do
that? That's a tough call.
That's a tough one, right? I don't know the answer to that one either.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, anyone who says they can really predict Trump, I think is wrong, because Trump doesn't. He's constantly changing his mind according to the people around him, right? That are convincing him. The last person we talked to him 15 minutes ago, right? I don't necessarily believe that he has too many strongly held opinions, other than that William McKinley was cool and that was the golden age of America, right? Tariffs good, sanctions bad. I mean, I'm laughing, but we're mocking, but I really, it's hard to pin. That's why Putin at one point said Kamala Harris and Biden were predictable. Trump is not. We prefer a predictable adversary to an unpredictable one by and large.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark Sleboda on Mark Sleboda1 on Twitter. You can also catch him on Boosty. That is going to be, I guess, kind of like a Substack Patreon type account.
Yes,
where you can
the
find
Real Politics on Boosty, and
Real
also on Substack and Telegram.
He's fantastic. He's fantastic. Mark, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
You as well.
All right.